Don't settle for bad socks. Get comfort and grip at an affordable price with Pure Grip Socks Pro. Choose from 18 different colors at puregripsocks.com.
Coming off the high of what is a very unique but also incredibly high performing pair of speed boots in the Ultra 5 Carbon, in this box I have what's next for Puma, where I think it's safe to say they're not quite as groundbreaking. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the brand new Puma King Ultimate, which is the same name as the previous model. It's something that Puma seems to like to do lately, so for the sake of clarity, we'll call this version 2 or the 2024 model, and just like the version it replaces, it builds on the same concept of utilizing that synthetic K better upper, utilization of synthetic materials rather than the Puma King's typical kangaroo leather. With all the changes made appearing to be pretty subtle, but all coming together to make what I would argue is a definite improvement over version 1, which admittedly was a disappointing pair of football boots. The question now becomes, have they changed enough to make a synthetic Puma King something that people actually want? Where speaking of wanting a pair, this limited edition launch colorway, where I'm pretty confident they're not all gonna say King in giant letters across the side, retails for $230 rather than version 1's usual $200 retail price. So is this $30 increase gonna stick around for general release colorways? Let's hope not, but I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if they did up the price. We all know Puma's capable of making some fantastic football boots. I think the main question that needs to be asked though is this one of them? How do they compare to the competition? And realistically, the concept Puma is really trying to push on us, the consumer, with the new King Ultimate is, can you really make a Puma King without natural kangaroo leather and still have it feel like a Puma King? We're gonna discuss all of that and more in today's video, including how they fit and feel on feet. So if you're interested in learning more, please stick around. And if you are interested in a pair for yourself, you can pick them up below their normal retail price by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes via the first link down below. And as always, if you enjoy the unsugar-coated, brutally honest content on this channel, make sure you drop a like on the video and make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2024. First things first, let's talk touch, because that's obviously going to be the main selling point or the main reason why you want nothing to do with the new King Ultimate. Instead of natural kangaroo leather, you're going to find an evolution of their K-Better synthetic originally introduced on the first King Ultimate. And compared to that football boot, they've definitely added a little bit of thickness and even some 3D texturing in the form of these kind of ridges on the medial side and then a little bit of an embossed section here on the lateral side, where visually, especially these ridges, kind of remind me a little bit of the King Platinum 21, which is one of the worst top-end football boots I've ever worn that did actually feature kangaroo leather. Luckily, these feel a lot better than those. The question, of course, becomes, is K-Better actually better or at least as good as the real thing in natural kangaroo leather? And of course, the answer to that question is purely subjective, and I suppose it does depend on who you're asking, but if you want my personal opinion, compared to the real thing, this simply is not as good, but it is a convincing material made from synthetic that gives you a little bit of that natural leather-like sensation on the ball. I wouldn't say against the foot it's particularly soft, and generally just because of the shaping of this King Ultimate, while definitely a little bit wider and slightly more forgiving than the original version, which I thought was just too slim in profile overall, it's still very noticeable that this is a synthetic versus natural leather, which is just softer, way more pliable, and generally less structured than what you're gonna find from this. So there are some benefits to this K-Better in the sense that from a responsiveness standpoint, there's more structure to this material and your foot's gonna be kind of held in place a little bit more securely. Of course, the downside with that is it's maybe lacking in comfort compared to natural kangaroo leather, and certainly from a touch perspective, while they've upped the thickness compared to the original King Ultimate very slightly, it still is on the thinner side compared to, again, that kind of little bit of plushness, that softness to the initial touch that only natural leather seems to be able to provide. You just don't get that with these. What you do get, however, compared to a natural leather boot is additional grip on the ball, where it does have kind of like an artificial leather grain finish. You can see on the ridges, they've added a little bit of 3D texturing that is definitely noticeable on the ball, where typically a natural leather boot kind of has a slicker finish overall, which again is very much a personal preference. Added grip doesn't necessarily equate to better control, but if you like having a little bit of a dampened feel in terms of touch on the ball as well as some additional grip, I think that's kind of what this has on offer and does pretty well. And as hypercritical as I'm being of this upper, at the end of the day, you're not forced to buy a synthetic boot just yet. There are natural kangaroo leather options out there. And if you're asking me personally, if you're looking for the best leather football boot experience, it's still gonna come from the real thing rather than this synthetic take on the real thing. And even when you're talking about synthetic football boots mimicking the feel of natural leather, when you compare this to realistically what is its main competition in the Nike Tiempo Legend 10 Elite with its Fly Touch Plus synthetic material, that synthetic leather is softer, more pliable, and arguably just more convincing in terms of the leather-like feel that it has on offer. Not to say that this is bad. I think it's a huge improvement actually over the original King Ultimate, but still not as good as Nike and still not as good as just the real thing. Across the top of the foot, you'll find a few more changes where the laces still run down the middle, but compared to version 1 have been pushed very slightly to the lateral side of the foot. I think that's pretty clear to see, especially highlighted with this kind of King branding here in red. Laces run nice and deep, which is really good. You of course have that one-piece containment structure to the upper, with the central portion being filled in with this knit material. Technically a new knit pattern, not something that you really feel on the ball. And then of course that flows into what is a low cut construction, which has definitely gone in a more traditional direction where there's more padding and more bulk and just generally something more simple at the back, which I think is significantly more comfortable through the heel when compared to the version 1, which I just wasn't a huge fan of. Internally, you're gonna find this really soft microfiber material. They have some Ortholite branding, which is the type of foam behind the liner itself. Does it feel particularly special? I can't say that it does. And even in the grand scheme of general heel liners, I didn't find this one to be standout comfortable, but not uncomfortable either. So that's definitely worth mentioning. And then the insole is fully removable. I do quite like it in the sense that it does have a little bit of added grip to the liner by way of their nano grip material, which is very subtly grippy against your sock. This one doesn't feel particularly sticky, at least not as sticky as other ones, but when you do wear it with socks, you definitely can feel that little bit of extra grip that comes from the material. Bit of a fail here, you can see there's a QR code that you can scan for more information on something because the QR code doesn't work, at least in my experience. Try scanning it now, see if it works for you. But for me, it did absolutely nothing. And then the insole itself is made from a single layer of this black foam with these really thin yellow foam inserts that I'm not sure really change up the feel or thickness of the insole much at all. Overall, pretty standard insole as far as the foam setup is concerned, but I do like the liner. Which brings us to the base of the boot, where you'll find a sole plate stud pattern and external heel counter that remains identical to version 1. No changes to the sole plate tooling whatsoever. It's a flexible sole plate, giving a more traditional feel as you'd expect from something bearing the Puma King name, with a stud pattern that again is kind of classic Puma King in the sense that it's all conical studs, but in what I would argue is a more modern layout as well as a more modern profile to the studs, where they're on the longer side and fairly narrow in shape, meaning that despite their more traditional look, the grip and traction provided is more aggressive than you might expect. Obviously, if you want more bite, something with bladed studs is definitely going to be the way to go, but for this style of football boot, I think what they have here works quite nice, but again, not really a standout in the grand scheme of top-end football boots. And then there's the weight, where it's always fun to see what the new model weighs in comparison to the version it replaces, both in the same size 9.5 US. We'll start off with version 1 of the King Ultimate, and you can see that they weigh in at 7.4 ounces, the equivalent of 209 grams. Remember those numbers. We'll change the scale back to ounces, and we'll throw on version 2 of the King Ultimate, and you can see that they weigh in at 7.9 ounces, the equivalent of 224 grams. That's a 15 gram weight increase for version 2, but given the slightly thicker K-Better upper and the significantly more padded as well as more comfortable heel construction, personally, I'd take those extra 15 grams over the OG. And not to suggest that either of these are heavy football boots, because they're not, but given that you're losing out on the real thing in kangaroo leather, you can get actual kangaroo leather football boots that weigh less than this, or you could even get the Nike Tiempo, which is a synthetic boot with a leather-like upper that also weighs less than these. The fit and feel on feet is really where I take the most issue with the King Ultimate in general, whether it's Gen 1 or Gen 2, and I will admit this new version does fit and feel a lot better than the original on my feet in particular. I think if you really liked version 1, not sure how many of those people are actually out there, but if you are, you might actually not like the changes that they've made to version 2, in that in a lot of ways, they've made it a little bit wider, they've increased the volume, and they've just added more bulk and padding to the heel area, which I personally find to be more comfortable. But again, comfort and fit is very much a subjective thing at the end of the day. With that in mind, being that this is a Puma King, and the idea behind the K-Better synthetic is to basically imitate the feel of natural kangaroo leather, when I put these on my feet, just like the original King Ultimate, nothing about them screams classic comfortable leather football boot. They really feel more like tight-fitting speed boots, and even though they have increased the width and volume slightly with this new model, it still wraps your foot very closely, and the material as a whole, while it's soft and pliable, it doesn't have a lot of stretch to it. It's very structurally sound, and I'm not sure if that's down to the lining material inside of the boot, but it really has more of that almost mercurial, tight, squeeze your foot sensation than it does a classic leather boot feel, where for me, if I'm buying a Puma King because I want that traditional feel, it's as tight, if not tighter, than the Puma Ultra Speed boots, which I think is a little bit of a confusing thing for me. If you really want the most comfortable boot from Puma right now, it's not the King, it's the Puma Future. Nonetheless, the boots do feel okay if you like that tighter fit overall. Again, not really a standout for any particular reason or feature. They're just okay for the price, I suppose. There are definitely much more comfortable football boots out there. I think the shape is fantastic if you like that tighter overall fit, where from a width perspective, these are not a good option for somebody with wide feet. And also, despite the low cut design, because of that one piece upper construction, they can be a little bit tricky to put on, and that the opening is fairly small because there's not a lot of stretch to this knitted material across the top of the foot. So for somebody with wide feet, this would actually be a terrible option, but if you like that tight fit, they should work well for most foot types. And then as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these in my usual size 9.5 US, and they do fit pretty snug. The same was also true with the original King Ultimate, where I wouldn't say that they necessarily run half a size small, maybe a quarter size, maybe even a little bit less than that. For me personally, I just would rather have the tighter fit than the extra space at the end. So as long as you like that tighter fit, true to size definitely isn't a bad shout. But if you do need that little bit of extra room because your current boots are maybe a little bit too tight, if you are interested in the King Ultimate, going up half a size probably wouldn't be a bad idea. So in conclusion, I'll keep things short and sweet. The Puma King Ultimate version 2 is a definite improvement over version 1, and it's also a pair of football boots that honestly I wouldn't mind wearing. However, for $200+, if I wanted something with a synthetic leather upper for just over $100, I think the Tiempo Legend 10 Pro is a better pair of football boots. And if I actually wanted the real thing, you can also get a better pair of football boots with an actual leather upper that I would argue offers a better touch on the ball in the also just over $100 New Balance 442 version 2 Pro. It's a solid pair of football boots, but it arguably does absolutely nothing better than any of the alternatives.